Hours after declaring the imposition of a 25% tariff on India, US President Donald Trump announced a deal with Pakistan to develop Islamabad's oil reserves that could potentially be read by an American petroleum company. The announcement comes hours after Trump took aim at India, promising to impose 25% in tariffs from 1st of August, along with an additional penalty due to New Delhi's continued purchase of Russian energy products, highlighting his irritation with the ongoing negotiations for a mini deal between the two countries. The back-to-back announcements have impacted the perception of India's ties with the US. For the better part of the last decade, Indian efforts have seen a number of strategic convergences with the United States of America, including through multiple groupings such as the Quad and the I2U2. The two sides have also created bilateral mechanisms such as the US-India Trust to focus on the development of critical and emerging technologies. However, the US administration in recent weeks have been in touch with Islamabad at various levels, with Trump hosting Pakistani Field Marshal Asim Munir for a lunch meeting last month at the White House. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with his counterpart Ishaq Dar last week in Washington, D.C. The two officials discussed deepening the relationship between Washington, D.C. and Islamabad with a focus on critical minerals and the mining sectors. Rubio appreciated Pakistan's role in mediating conversations between the US and Iran, as well as Islamabad's commitment to preserving regional stability. Trump, in his statement, did not name the oil company to lead the exploration and development of Pakistan's oil reserves. The total trade in goods between the two countries stood at roughly $7.3 billion in 2024, with Islamabad exporting roughly $5.1 billion worth of goods in the aforementioned year. The renewed optimism in ties comes after Islamabad has consistently thanked the role of Washington, D.C. to ensure the cessation of firing with India in May. While India has rejected the role of the US in this bilateral understanding, Pakistan has, according to its own leadership, nominated Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. Whereas, India and the US have been in negotiations over a mini trade deal since Trump announced global tariffs on 2nd April. Trump, along with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, also announced a larger bilateral trade agreement during the former's visit to Washington, D.C. in February of this year. Negotiations for the mini deal was focused on reducing the additional levies that Trump had announced on a number of countries above the baseline 10% tariff. The American president took aim at a number of economies that maintained a large trade surplus with the US. India exported roughly $77 billion worth of goods to the US last year, while importing roughly $42.1 billion worth of items, maintaining roughly a $35 billion trade surplus. Indian negotiators were most recently in the US earlier this month with hopes of a deal to be signed soon. New Delhi had made a number of concessions, including allowing certain processed dairy products to be exported from the US, and also indicating a willingness to open small portions of its agricultural sector. However, negotiations have stalled with the US seeking further access to India's agricultural and dairy markets, which is a red line for New Delhi. Negotiations have been unable to lead to a final mini deal. The next round of negotiations are scheduled to be held in India in the second half of August in New Delhi. Trump's promise to levy additional penalties on India for its purchase of Russian oil is the latest pressure the American president is attempting to apply on Moscow to sign a ceasefire deal with Ukraine. Trump promised to end the Russia-Ukraine war within 24 hours of assuming the presidency last year while he was on the campaign trail. However, Trump's diplomatic efforts 7 months into his second term have borne little fruit. Even a partial ceasefire agreed to by Russian President Vladimir Putin fell through. Trump in the early months of this year applied pressure on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for a ceasefire deal to pause the war. The war has continued to rage for nearly 3.5 years. US Senator Lindsey Graham had moved a couple of months ago, announced his intention to introduce a bill that would give Trump the power to impose tariffs of up to 500% on countries that purchase Russian energy in an attempt to further apply economic pressure on Moscow. The focus of these sanctions would be on India and China. In the 2024-25 financial year, India had imported roughly $56 billion worth of Russian energy and is one of the largest buyers of Russian oil. India has maintained that its energy security is of paramount importance. Early in July, the EU also imposed a set of secondary sanctions on entities dealing with Russia, including the Vadina refinery in India. While the Indian government has acknowledged Trump's statement on Wednesday, New Delhi has maintained that it will take all necessary steps to maintain its national interest. A few hours after highlighting the 25% tariffs of Indian goods, the US President said in an interaction that the final tariffs will be clearer by the end of this week, while also taking exception to New Delhi's continued membership within BRICS. That is all for me today. For more such news and analysis, subscribe below.